Hi, my friends. Welcome to Deep Six, the Deep State. The information I have today is really important and really significant. The FBI informant who infiltrated the Russian efforts to take over the American uranium supply, or at least a fifth of it, has revealed important new information that The Hill, the newspaper I used to write for it, revealed key information yesterday that really reshapes totally our understanding of the Uranium One deal and casts suspicions on a number of people in the Justice Department, including Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, who is responsible for Mueller's appointment. Let me tell this story. It's complicated and it's long, but bear with me. It completely reverses and revises everything we thought we knew about it. First of all, a word on the source. The Hill is a genuinely bipartisan, nonpartisan newspaper that is published daily in Washington, and along with Politico is sort of the go-to place for inside information. But Politico, which has a liberal tilt, is different because The Hill has a more conservative tilt and a more objective one. In this case, The Hill is issuing information that is quite opposite of what Sessions is telling Congress in public, what Rosenstein, his deputy, has said in public, and what Campbell is in fact saying in his testimony. Just start with the basics of the Uranium One scandal. Sorry, I'm going to have to rely on notes here because it is so complicated and in many ways so hard to understand. But I think I've mastered it, and I'll share it with you and spare you the effort. We're talking really about a 5,000-word article in The Hill that really explains the entire concept. The Uranium One scandal was part of a Russian effort, a major Russian effort, to corner the uranium supply in the world, and in particular to make the United States dependent on Russia for its uranium. The U.S. never mined a great deal of uranium and depleted its supply, and then rekindled its supply after the Soviet Union fell, and a program called Megatons into Megawatts, play on the biblical swords into plowshares. And the idea was that as the Russian nuclear weapons were decommissioned as part of the more pro-Western attitude of the Yeltsin administration in Russia, though they would be the enriched uranium and the uranium itself would be transformed into a source for electric power and would power the nuclear grids in the United States. And Russia infiltrated that program and used in effect, the movement, I'm sorry, because of that program, the United States did not develop nearly as rapidly as it might have its own uranium capacity and became more and more dependent on the uranium furnished by the Megatons into Megawatts program of decommissioning Soviet weaponry. By 2013, that deal had expired, and the United States had to go it alone, cold turkey, without access to adequate uranium, except that which it could buy from Russia. And in response to the U.S.'s losing that source of uranium, the Uranium One deal came about, which was an effort by Putin to seize control of at least 20% of our uranium at just the time that we were running out and more dependent than ever on Russia as a source of uranium. Uranium One was part of a strategy, I'm reading from The Hill during this stuff, to dominate global Ukrainian markets, making the United States more dependent on Moscow's nuclear fuel. Documents the informant, Campbell, the FBI informant, gave the FBI clearly show that the purchase of Uranium One was seen by Russia and its American consultants, who were themselves Russian agents or bribed by the Russians, as a tool in a strategy to control uranium markets worldwide. In the United States, that strategy focused on securing billions of new uranium contracts to create a new reliance on Russian nuclear fuel, just as the Cold War era megatons to megawatts program, which recycled Soviet nuclear weapons into fuel for American nuclear power plants, was ending. So that was part of a broad effort initiated in the later years of the 2000 to 2010 decade. Uranium, and then the issue is what happened to the uranium-1's ore. The administration under Obama took the position that none of its fuel was exported, that it all stayed in the United States and helped fuel American nuclear reactors. But the Hill reports that Uranium-1 did export some of the U.S. uranium ore, according to Romanian ore. But the Washington Post reported that none of the uranium ore's product left the United States after Russia took control. In fact, the NRCC, Nuclear Energy Regulatory Commission, approved an export license for a third-party trucking firm to export uranium ore to Canada for enrichment, and then some of that uranium ended up in Europe, the NRCC records show. The NRCC memos, Uranium-1 itself admits this, as 25% of its uranium was exported to Canada, largely ending up in European and Asian markets. We don't know which ones at this point. So the establishment, as indicated by the Washington Post, and later you'll see by Reuters and some other organizations, including Shep Smith and Fox News, said that none of this was exported, that it all stayed in the United States. Not true. It was exported. And you can't rule out the possibility that it might have been exported after it went to Canada to some very bad actors. And I'm raising, not them, the possibility that that might include Iran and North Korea. The FBI informant, I'm reading now again from the Hill, Douglas Campbell, does have information to share with Congress on the Uranium-1 purchase. Justice officials have suggested in recent stories that Campbell had little on Uranium-1 because his work focused on nuclear bribery involving a different Russian subsidiary. Now, Hill says that while it's true that Campbell's undercover work focused on criminality inside the Russian subsidiary, he did gather extensive documents about Russia's efforts to win approval to buy Uranium-1. That was the transaction that was approved by the Committee on Foreign Investments in the U.S., headed by Hillary Clinton. The FBI did have evidence that Rosatom, that's the Russian Atomic Agency, Rosatom officials were engaged in criminality well before the Obama administration approved Rosatom's purchase of Uranium-1. Evidence that a foreign company is involved in criminality can disqualify anyone from getting a license to buy a foreign American energy firm. I'm sorry, do that from the top. Evidence that a foreign company is involved in criminality can disqualify it from the Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S. approval to buy a sensitive U.S. asset. And Campbell helped the FBI record the first criminal activity by Rosatom officials in November 2009, nearly a year before that sale took place. In other words, an agent of the FBI, an undercover agent, had information to confirm criminal activity, in this case export and bribery, by the Rosatom, the company that asked for permission to take over Uranium-1. And despite that information, the Committee on Foreign Investment went ahead and approved that sale. Is it because they didn't know about it and the FBI didn't share it, or because they knew about it and they disregarded it, or that they themselves were, in effect, bought off? Justice Department officials and trusted Campbell, that was originally said that Campbell wasn't that highly placed, trusted him enough to keep him working undercover for 6 years. And then when convictions were secured of Americans who were bribed by Rosatom, he got a $50,000 bonus check and a $1,500 restaurant meal to commemorate and congratulate him on the findings. Campbell, who was paid $50,000 a month, that's not the bonus, $50,000 a month to consult for the Russian firm, was solicited by Russian colleagues to help overcome political opposition to the Uranium-1 purchase. One purchase while connecting the to the Uranium-1 purchase. So just again from the top. Campbell was paid $50,000 a month to consult by Russian colleagues to help overcome political opposition to the Uranium-1 purchase, while collecting FBI evidence that was part of a larger effort by Moscow to make the U.S. more dependent on Russian uranium. So he was retained, Campbell was retained to help block political opposition to the Uranium-1 sale. And that, of course, is something that goes directly at the heart of Hillary because of her involvement in that. There's an email written by Rod Fisk, a name we'll come to know well, an American contractor working for the Russians, on June 24th, 2010. And Fisk covered sent Campbell a news article and said the attached article is of interest as I believe it highlights the ongoing resolve in Russia to gradually and systematically acquire and control global energy sources. Campbell's work was valuable enough that the FBI itself paid him over $200,000, mostly for reimbursements over the years. The FBI task force supervising Campbell since 2008 watched as the Obama administration made more than half a dozen decisions favorable to the Russian plan. So in other words, while we were collecting evidence that Russia was bribing and going crazy to try to get control of Uranium-1, and that this evidence of bribery was being totally ignored by the Obama administration, and had they focused on it, it would have blocked the sale of Uranium-1. It says that Russia took half a dozen decisions favorable to Russia's plan to take over the uranium supply, which ranged from approving the sale of Uranium-1 to removing Rosatom from export restrictions and making it easier for Moscow to win billions in new commercial uranium sales contracts. The favorable decisions occurred during a time when President Obama and Secretary of State Clinton were pursuing a public reset button to improve our relations with Russia. Now, last week, Sessions and Deputy Attorney General Ross Rosenstein, who's the guy who made Mueller's appointment, in a letter to the Senate last month, tried to suggest that there was no connection between Uranium-1 and the nuclear bribery case. The argument was that the criminal charges in the bribery case weren't filed until 2014, while criticism of the Committee on Foreign Investments in the United States' approval of the Uranium-1 sale occurred 4 years earlier in 2010. But that's not true. Sessions told the Congress last week, the way I understand that matter is that the case in which Mr. Millerin was convicted, the bribery plot, was not connected with the CFI-US, Committee on Foreign Investments in U.S., that occurred 2 to 3 years before. And Rosenstein echoed that idea in a letter that he sent the committee a few weeks earlier. And this is the Hill. But investigative records show FBI counterintelligence recorded the first illicit payments in the bribery kickback scheme to November 2009, a year before the CFI-US approval. So Sessions and Rosenstein are saying, hey, this stuff occurred long before the indictments were brought against the Russian bribery case. And here they're saying, no, there was complete evidence of this bribery going on as late as 1 year before the approval. So they had to have this information when they made the approval. This is a statement by a source with direct knowledge of the investigation. My guess is a member of Congress. There is zero doubt we had evidence of criminal activity before the CFI-US approval. Zero doubt. And the Justice Department knew about it through the National Security Division. Attorney General Sessions seemed to say that the bribery, racketeering, and money laundering offenses involving Tenex, an American company run by the Russians, occurred after the approval of the Uranium-1 deal by the Obama administration. But we know that the FBI confidential document was confidential informant was actively compiling evidence as far back as 2009, Representative Ron DeSantis told The Hill. It is hard to fathom how such a transaction could have been approved without the existence of the underlying corruption being disclosed. The essential question is whether the Obama Justice Department provided evidence of the criminal activity of certain officials before the CFIUS approval of the Uranium One deal and other government decisions that enabled Russians to trade nuclear materials into the United States. So the question is, what did they know and when did they know it? It's clear that the United States government, and through the FBI, had concrete evidence from an informant of a bribery scheme to transfer uranium assets from the U.S. to Russian control. And it's clear that they had that information now before the CIFUS approved the sale. And had they used that information and brought it to everybody's attention, it would have killed the sale. Similar misinformation surfaced last week in a series of articles by Reuters and Yahoo News. This is from The Hill, in which officials were quoted as casting doubt that Campbell had any information about the Uranium One deal, because 10X was a different division of Rosatom than the subsidiary that bought the mining firm. But Campbell's FBI informant file shows that Uranium One came up several times in 2010, just as the deal was pending, partly because 10X was Rosatom's commercial arm that would be charged with finding markets for the new uranium being mined. Now, so that the Hill concludes that Campbell himself was directly solicited by his colleagues to help in Russia to help overcome opposition to the Uranium One deal. FBI informant files show on October 6, 2010, Fisk forwarded a news article outlining Republican efforts to derail the uranium deal, ultimately which led to Hillary's approving the deal. The memo from Fisk said, "The referenced article may present a very good opportunity for Sigma, Campbell's company, to try and remove the opposing influences, if that is something you can do," meaning removing the Russian, persuading the Republicans not to oppose the uranium deal. Some Republicans, this report warned, that some Republicans truly fear the entry of Russia into the U.S. market, as demonstrated by the fact that they are taking steps to block the purchase of Uranium One. In recent days, news media, including the Washington Post, and Fox News anchor Shepard Smith, this is from the Hill, they were all basically Democratic-oriented, the Hill perhaps less so than the others, and yet the Hill reports that in recent days, news media, including the Washington Post and Fox News anchor Shepard Smith, inaccurately reported another element of the story, that Uranium One never exported American uranium because the Obama administration did not allow it. However, the NRCC, National Regulatory Commission, authorized Uranium One to export through a third party tons of uranium to Canada for enrichment processing, and some of that product ended up in Europe, NRC documents state. So here we have Shepard Smith and Reuters peddling misinformation that this uranium stayed in the United States. So to put all this together, you have evidence here of an ongoing Russian attempt to corner control of the uranium market in the United States, directly relating to the end of the provision of uranium from the decommissioning of Russian weapons. The decommissioning program ended in 2013. And Russia tried to fill that void by taking control of much of the American uranium mining capacity. And Campbell, the agent who uncovered all this, the informant, was right in the middle of that transaction. And yet Sessions and Rosenstein led the committee, the investigating committee, to believe that his efforts to expose the criminality of the Russian bribery plot had nothing to do with the decision to permit the sale of Rosatom. But Campbell, in his documents and probably in his testimony, will show that they were linked. and whether deliberately or inadvertently, Sessions and Rosenstein are in effect covering that up. Very damning information. And he underscores also the vigorous efforts of the Republican Party people in this period to try to stop the sale from taking place, that the sale was part of a broader effort by Russia to acquire access to the uranium, involving at least half a dozen approvals from the Obama administration that allowed that to take place. Wow. After Campbell testifies, we'll be talking about this at length. But this is a scandal that is huge and seems to have spread to the institutional sources within the Justice Department. That's not to say necessarily to Sessions, but to a bunch of his people. And this could be a very significant development, not just in the Uranium One scandal, but in Sessions' ability to continue as Attorney General. Wow. By the way, you may have gathered Renee is not feeling well today, and she's not asking questions, so I can't get your questions, but we'll pick them up tomorrow. I'll bet you have a few. Now, the International Criminal Court is a body set up by treaty. It's a body under the UN, not to be confused with the International Court of Justice, which has been around since the UN was founded in 1946. The International Criminal Court came to being from a treaty signed in the 1980s and 90s. First by Carter. Reagan opposed the treaty and refused to submit it for ratification. Obama picked it up again and urged it to be ratified. When Bush became president, he rescinded the American signature on that treaty because Bush did not want, George W. Bush, Bush 43, did not want the treaty to be used against American troops. The treaty, for example, says that the International Criminal Court shall prosecute human rights violations throughout the world. And one of the violations that's cited is killing civilians through drone strikes and stuff, and also to hold American troops individually responsible for any actions that they may have taken that violate human rights. And in this case, that might include attacks that killed civilians. Bush did not want that hanging over our troops. So when we invaded Iraq, he rescinded our signature on that treaty so there would not be binding on us. Now the International Criminal Court, which is recognized by every nation in the world except the United States, has moved to investigate the United States, and in particular to investigate our troops in Afghanistan and look for evidence that could be prosecuted by the court. Now, the court has no jurisdiction in the United States or over American people because Bush had rescinded the signature. But nevertheless, if they're in foreign territory, they could be arrested and prosecuted by the ICC, even if American courts don't want to do that. A graphic example of the power of the ICC, which we explain, by the way, in our book, Here Come the Black Helicopters, that talks a lot about the ICC. They defined a new human right, a sin against human rights, called aggression. And aggression is defined in the treaty as going to war without the approval of the UN Security Council, which basically means without Russian and Chinese approval. And Bush 41 swept that aside and didn't pay any attention to it, and there was an effort to indict him by the ICC after he left office. And George H.W. Bush, Bush 41, had to cancel a trip to Switzerland where he was to receive an award for fighting for freedom because there was a fear that the ICC would arrest him while he was in Switzerland, which is subject to ICC jurisdiction. And as a result, Bush canceled his plans and never visited Switzerland. So it's really an attempt by the United Nations to take over America's war-making power and to say that if you go to war without the approval of the Security Council, which of course means Russia and China, you are committing a crime against humanity and can be prosecuted. Now, the ICC has done some good work, particularly in going after human rights violations during the war in Bosnia, but it's relatively few investigations, and it now appears to be turned into an anti-American instrument, which it really has been throughout its history. And it's a very dangerous institution because of its power. Now, Corker, our beloved chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Senate, has introduced a resolution limiting the power of the President of the United States to use nuclear weapons in war. Trump satirized it and called it the Kim Jong-un Empowerment Act. And it says that the Secretary of Defense and of State can countervene an order of the President to use nuclear weapons. Now, that's blatantly unconstitutional. The President is the Commander-in-Chief, and it's really part of the personal ongoing feud that Corker has with Trump. And it's just an outrage that that bill is being supported by the Republican chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee. Just absolutely incredible. So we're now, just another word about the Moore election in Alabama. I said yesterday that beyond the question of Moore's guilt or innocence of the charges lay the possibility that he might lose the election to a Democrat, giving that seat in Alabama to the Democrats, endangering the Republican majority, and probably killing the tax cut and the Obamacare mandate repeal in the process. And I said that we can't allow that to happen, that we lost 2 and possibly 3 Senate seats we should have won in 2010, because first the guy in Missouri, Aiken, and the guy in Indiana, Mourdock, made stupid statements about abortion and rape, and the outrage forced them basically to lose the election. And I'm concerned that the allegations against Moore may do the same. But there appears to be an increasing new development, which is the polling that I reported yesterday is now being superseded in the newest polls today by something of a pro-Moore boom. Not a boom, but a pro-Moore trend. He's gone from he first was winning by 11 points. Then he was winning by 8 points. Then he was behind by 10 points. Then he was behind by 8 points in Fox News polls. Now he's closed to within 5 points in Fox News. And you can really see a reversal of trend kicking up at the moment. And I think it's possible that all of the discussion of sexual harassment, the accusations and the firing of the various people involved in having perpetrated the scandal, including Charlie Rose, is making Moore's conduct seem less condemnable. That he was not, that there was no rape involved, no touching, and other stuff. Or we're just becoming more used to the charges. Or information is coming out to undermine the credibility of the women making these accusations. But one way or another, Moore's numbers seem to be improving. So can you put this whole thing on hold, and let's read the evidence as the election on December 12th approaches. We should not come to snap conclusions here. I believe the principle is true, whether you think Moore is guilty or innocent. The key question here is, can he win? And if he can win, he won the Republican primary, and he deserves our support. If he can't win, this is no price to pay for, in effect, losing our Senate majority. So let's keep focused on this, and we'll talk about it as the time nears for the election. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.